Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going straight into the tangled histories and, well, the present-day tensions of two really significant global flashpoints, Kashmir and Nagorno-Karabakh. We've sifted through a whole range of sources, news reports, detailed analyses, even some first-hand accounts, really trying to bring you the crucial insights.
Right.
Our goal isn't just to lay out the facts, but to, really understand the core issues, identify the key players involved, and maybe consider what the future might hold for these incredibly complex regions.
Absolutely. And these are conflicts with such deep roots, often kind of obscured by competing narratives, aren't they?
Totally.
It can feel like you're navigating a maze of information sometimes. So our aim really is to extract the most vital pieces for you, connect them in a meaningful way, and perhaps shed light on some of the less obvious, but still critically important dynamics at play.
Exactly. And we've drawn from outlets like Reuters, CBS, Al Jazeera, plus reports from human rights organizations, just trying to paint a clearer picture. Okay, so let's jump right in with Kashmir, this disputed territory. It's been a major point of contention for, well, decades.
Yeah, the core of the Kashmir issue, and our sources consistently highlight this, it's that unresolved territorial dispute. It stems right from the 1947 partition of British India.
Right.
Both India and Pakistan claim the entire region, but, in reality, they control different parts. And these parts are separated by what's known as the line of control.
And that division itself was a direct result of the first big conflict.
Pretty much, yeah. The War of 1947-48, you had Pakistan-backed tribal militias entering the region. The Maharaja of Kashmir then chose to accede to India.
And the UN stepped in.
The UN intervened, yes, with the ceasefire. But a key part of the UN resolution, a proposed plebiscite to let Kashmiris decide their own future. That never actually happened.
Why not?
Well, India and Pakistan just couldn't agree on the conditions needed for demilitarization first. So that initial spark, it's never really been put out.
Precisely. And that unresolved question has just kept fueling tensions, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Leading to more wars.
Exactly. Further wars in 1965 and then 1999, the Kargil conflict. And while the 71 war was mostly about Bangladesh, it certainly didn't help relations between India and Pakistan.
Not at all.
But here's where things get particularly complex. The rise of, terrorism and insurgency in the region, starting around the late 1980s.
And that's when the accusations about Pakistan supporting groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba really ramped up, especially after the horrific 2008 Mumbai attacks.
Yes. Now, Pakistan consistently denies directly backing these groups. They say their support for Kashmiri separatists is purely diplomatic. It's a very murky area.
Extremely murky. But considering, declassified Indian intelligence, what sort of evidence points to a possible link, even if it's not, direct state sponsorship?
Well, that intelligence, while it's not totally conclusive in the public domain, it often mentions things like intercepted communications, the operational capabilities of these groups, suggesting some level of external support beyond just words.
But Pakistan insists they operate independently.
That's their position, yes. What our sources also show is a recent escalation just back in May 2025. After an attack on tourists in Pahalgam in April, India launched airstrikes,
claiming they hit terrorist infrastructure inside Pakistan.
Right, and then Pakistan retaliated with drone strikes. It brought the two sides, honestly, dangerously close to a bigger conflict before the U.S. managed to broker a ceasefire.
Wow.
So this recent flare-up really just highlights how volatile things still are.
So beyond this history, what are the core underlying causes keeping this conflict burning? It's obviously more than just a line on a map.
Oh, absolutely. The Kashmir dispute is, profoundly linked to the national identities of both India and Pakistan.
How so?
Well, for India, holding on to a Muslim-majority region like Kashmir is often seen as fundamental to its secular identity, its idea of nationhood.
Okay.
And for Pakistan, Kashmir is often viewed as sort of the unfinished business of partition, fitting with its vision as a Muslim homeland.
And then there's the bigger picture rivalry.
Exactly. The geopolitical rivalry is huge. You've got India's growing global influence,
which Pakistan and its ally China maybe see as a challenge.
Precisely. Pakistan's strong alliance with China is a major factor here. China provides massive economic and military support.
And we absolutely cannot forget the nuclear dimension.
No, you can't. Those arsenals they both developed in the 90s, they act as a deterrent against, full-scale war, mutually assured destruction, essentially.
But it also massively raises the stakes if someone miscalculates.
Yeah.
It's like two heavily armed neighbors just constantly on edge.
That's a good way to put it. The knowledge that any big conflict could escalate to nuclear use just casts this long, dark shadow.
And domestic politics plays a role, too.
Right. Oh, definitely. On both sides. In India, strong anti-Pakistan feelings can be a powerful tool for, nationalist mobilization.
And in Pakistan.
The military has historically used the Kashmir issue to maintain its influence domestically, to justify its large role in the state.
Okay, so we have this incredibly complex web of history and internal dynamics. But what about the outside players? Who else is significantly involved in Kashmir, and I guess what's in it for them?
Right. Well, the United States has often tried to play mediator, like with the 2025 ceasefire.
But it's a balancing act for them.
A very delicate one. They want strong ties with India, partly to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific.
Sure.
But they also need to engage with Pakistan, given its location and history, especially with Afghanistan next door. Ultimately, the U.S. wants regional stability, wants to prevent any one power getting too strong, but they've been pretty hesitant to get deeply involved in solving the core Kashmir dispute itself.
So maintaining influence is the main goal.
Largely, yes. Keeping influence in a really vital strategic region.
Then there's China. Seems like a particularly important player here.
Hugely important. China gives massive support to Pakistan. You've got the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC.
The huge infrastructure project.
Exactly, connecting China to the Arabian Sea, plus significant military backing. China really sees Pakistan as a crucial strategic counterweight to India.
And China has its own territorial stake too, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. China controls Aksai Chin, which is a part of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir. That adds another layer of complexity and direct friction with India. China's main motivation seems to be containing India and securing its own dominance in Asia.
What about other big players, like Russia?
Russia has historically been close to India. Lots of arms sales, long-standing alliances. They do engage with Pakistan too, but the lean has traditionally been towards India.
And they offered to mediate in 2025.
They did, which shows they want to keep their influence across South Asia, maybe stop any single other external power becoming too dominant.
And we also see countries like Turkey and Malaysia taking quite a vocal stance.
Yes, their support for Pakistan often comes from a sense of Muslim solidarity, plus some strategic alignment. They've been quite vocal in international forums, calling for investigations, resolutions. It's partly an effort to boost the influence of the Islamic bloc globally.
Interesting. And on the flip side, India has its allies too, like France and the UK.
Definitely. These countries often provide military and diplomatic support to India. They tend to see India as a large democracy, a potential counterweight to more authoritarian regimes. And for them, the benefits are clear. Access to India's huge market, valuable strategic partnerships.
Okay, so that covers the history and the big international players. But what about some of the, let's say, less visible aspects, the hidden layers that don't always make headlines?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting and sometimes honestly quite concerning. Our sources point to the growing role of AI-driven disinformation.
Oh, wow.
In 2025, there were documented cases of sophisticated AI deepfakes, like videos falsely showing U.S. support for, quote, Pakistan's destruction or something similar.
Designed to manipulate public opinion, presumably.
Clearly.
Yeah.
And likely to worsen tensions. Though, importantly, there was no confirmed proof linking those specific campaigns directly to state actors. But it just shows how easily narratives can be faked and spread now.
That's genuinely chilling. The potential for manipulated media to just pour gasoline on an already raging fire. And what about those persistent allegations about Pakistan's military, the ISI, supporting militant groups in Kashmir?
Right, as we touched on, Pakistan officially denies direct support. But declassified Indian intelligence, especially around events like the 2008 Mumbai attacks, suggests some level of ISI involvement.
But no smoking gun in public.
Exactly. It's crucial to say no definitive, publicly available evidence has emerged to unequivocally confirm those allegations. It stays a really deeply contested and sensitive point.
And then there's India's own policy shift in Kashmir, the controversial 2019 revocation of Article 370, stripping the region's special economist status. That caused huge waves.
It absolutely did. India's stated reason was mainly about curbing cross-border terrorism, integrating the region more fully, fostering development.
But the critics.
Critics argue forcefully that it marginalized Kashmiris, eroded their democratic rights, and potentially just fueled more resentment and alienation. It's a policy with really significant ongoing consequences, social, economic, political.
It really feels like you're trying to navigate a minefield of misinformation and competing stories when you try to understand Kashmir. How do we even start separating fact from fiction?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One common misconception is that Pakistan is solely responsible for funding and orchestrating terrorism there.
But it's more complex.
Far more complex. While militant groups have historically operated from Pakistani territory, that's true. Local Kashmiri grievances are also a huge factor. Decades of political marginalization, the heavy Indian military presence, socioeconomic issues, these all fuel the insurgency from within. It's definitely not a one-sided coin.
And another oversimplification might be thinking India's only goal is peace.
Well, India certainly frames its actions in terms of counterterrorism and security. But its more aggressive responses, like those 2025 airstrikes, they undeniably escalate tensions in the short term, whatever the stated long-term aim might be. It often feels like this reactive cycle.
But the one consistent and sadly accurate perception seems to be the nuclear risk.
Absolutely. Those nuclear arsenals, they likely do deter large-scale conventional war. But, as we said, they simultaneously introduce this terrifying possibility of a catastrophic miscalculation. The stakes are just unbelievably high, not just for the region, but potentially for the whole world.
So given this really intricate and frankly concerning picture, what does the near future look like for Kashmir? It doesn't sound overly optimistic.
No, the current trajectory based on what we're seeing suggests more of the same, unfortunately. Tit-for-tat incidents, diplomatic standoffs, the 2025 ceasefire feeling quite fragile.
And domestic pressures could easily trigger more escalation.
Easily. Within both India and Pakistan. The future risks are substantial. More nuclear brinkmanship is possible. Severe economic costs for everyone involved. Wider regional instability that could even pull in neighbors like Nepal who have their own border issues.
Are there any realistic paths towards resolution being seriously discussed or pursued?
Well, several strategies get floated. Bilateral talks between India and Pakistan, maybe starting with less sensitive stuff like trade, cultural exchange, trying to build some basic trust. International mediation, maybe the UN gets suggested. But India has historically resisted deep third-party involvement in what it sees as an internal issue.
Right.
And then there's a need for real efforts to counter disinformation, promote more accurate narratives, just to create a better environment for any kind of dialogue.
And what happens if these deep-rooted issues just aren't effectively dealt with?
The risks of just letting things drift are huge. You could see localized conflicts escalating into bigger confrontations, worsening humanitarian conditions inside Kashmir, and potentially major disruptions to the global economy because of instability in such a key region. The cost of inaction is just really, really high.
If you had to step back, try to be totally neutral, what would you say is the most promising way forward?
I think it has to be multi-pronged. First, really strengthen grassroots peace initiatives, things that bring communities on both sides of the line of control together.
Okay.
Second, actively amplify Kashmiri voices themselves. They often get lost in the big geopolitical arguments.
That seems crucial.
Third, maybe explore concrete economic cooperation, joint trade zones, things that create shared interests. And finally, ensure transparent, impartial investigations into all violence. That's key for building any trust or accountability.
And what do the people actually caught in the middle want? Kashmiris, ordinary Indians, Pakistanis?
For many Kashmiris, it boils down to wanting self-determination, or at least an end to the conflict and the heavy military presence impacting their daily lives.
And for Indians and Pakistanis more broadly?
There's definitely strong national pride and a desire for security on both sides. But underneath that, I think there's also a widespread wish for peace, if they could somehow trust the other side. Ultimately, lasting change needs real dialogue, real economic interdependence, and directly addressing those long-standing Kashmiri grievances.
It's so easy to get lost in the grand strategy, isn't it? But the human cost is vital to remember. We saw the story of Aisha, the Kashmiri teacher.
Yes, Aisha's story, reported by Al Jazeera, it's a powerful window into that daily reality. She lives with this constant fear of shelling, schools closing frequently, disrupting kids' lives and education. It's just a stark reminder of the human toll this endless conflict takes.
Truly sobering. Okay, let's shift our focus now to another region grappling with a really entrenched conflict, Nagorno-Karabakh. Geographically separate, of course, but there are some unsettling parallels in terms of history and outside involvement.
Indeed. The core issue in Nagorno-Karabakh revolves around the status of this region. It has a historical and current ethnic Armenian majority, but it lies within the internationally recognized borders of Azerbaijan.
And the history there is just as layered and sadly just as tragic.
Absolutely. Back in the Soviet era, Nagorno-Karabakh was an autonomous oblast, basically an administrative region within Azerbaijan.
But the Armenian population there wanted unification with Armenia.
That desire was always there, a persistent undercurrent, and it finally erupted into the First Nagorno-Karabakh War from 88 to 94.
And the outcome of that war.
Armenian forces ended up controlling not just Nagorno-Karabakh itself, but also significant surrounding territories. This led to huge displacement, hundreds of thousands of both Azerbaijanis and Armenians forced from their homes. A ceasefire was brokered in 94, leaving Armenia in control of the region.
But like in Kashmir, that ceasefire didn't mean lasting peace.
No, not at all. It was fragile. Then came the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020. Azerbaijan, this time with significant military help from Turkey.
Drones, especially.
Yes, those Turkish drones were highly effective. Azerbaijan launched a successful offensive, took back much of the territory lost in the First War. That ended with a Russia-brokered ceasefire.
But tensions remained high.
Very high. And then in 2023, Azerbaijan launched another decisive military offensive. This time, they fully reclaimed Nagorno-Karabakh.
And that led to the mass displacement of Armenians.
Yes, around 100,000 ethnic Armenians fled to Armenia. It triggered very serious humanitarian concerns and accusations of ethnic cleansing flew.
So what are the fundamental drivers here? What keeps this conflict going?
Well, at its heart, it's that territorial dispute. Azerbaijan asserts its sovereignty, sees Karabakh as integral. Armenians point to their long history there, call it Artsakh, emphasize cultural ties.
A clash of narratives?
Absolutely, compounded by deep-seated ethnic tensions, a long history of mistrust between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. And much like Kashmir, you have geopolitical interests, particularly Turkey and Russia, acting as major complicating factors, often fueling things through proxy support.
Let's dig into those international players in the Karabakh context. Turkey seems to have a very clear, active role.
Very clear, yes. Turkey's been a staunch supporter of Azerbaijan. Significant military aid, like those drones in 2020. Strong diplomatic backing.
And their motive?
Seems to be a mix of Turkic solidarity, shared heritage with Azerbaijan, and a strategic goal of countering Russian influence in the South Caucasus. Plus, there's a benefit. Potential for more regional dominance, more control over key energy corridors, like the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline.
That pipeline runs through Azerbaijan and Turkey.
Exactly. So regional stability, on their terms, is economically vital, too.
And Russia's role, it seems more complex given their historical security ties with Armenia.
It is complex and much debated. Russia was traditionally Armenia's security guarantor through the CSTO military alliance.
Right.
But their mediation in 2020 and their, shall we say, restrained response during the 2023 Azerbaijani offensive, it's led many to think their main goal now is just maintaining influence over both sides.
Playing both sides?
Or at least preventing either from aligning too closely with other powers, especially Turkey. Their motive seems to be controlling Caucasus stability on their terms, limiting Turkey's reach.
What about Iran? Another key regional player.
Iran has generally leaned towards supporting Armenia in this. It's largely seen as a way to counterbalance Azerbaijan's growing ties with Israel and Turkey, both regional rivals for Iran.
So it's about leverage.
Maintaining leverage, yes. Preventing what they see as rivals encroaching in the South Caucasus.
And we've also seen France and the U.S. voicing strong concerns, particularly after the 2023 displacement.
Yes, both have been very critical of Azerbaijan's actions, citing serious humanitarian concerns, even raising the specter of ethnic cleansing. Their motives, probably a mix of promoting democratic values, human rights, but also countering Russian and Turkish influence in that strategic area.
Similar to Kashmir, again, there seem to be these contested narratives and hidden dynamics shaping things in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Definitely. Take the ethnic cleansing accusations from Armenia after 2023. It's a prime example.
What's the reality there?
Well, Human Rights Watch and others documented the forced displacement of a huge number of Armenians. That's undeniable. But they haven't found conclusive evidence meeting the strict legal definition of systematic genocide. It's a really important distinction that often gets lost in the rhetoric.
And the role of foreign arms sales.
Yeah.
Israel selling drones to Azerbaijan caused a lot of friction.
Oh, absolutely. Armenia strongly criticized Israel, arguing those drones directly helped Azerbaijan's military success and escalated the conflict.
But legally,
Legally, they were commercial deals. It just highlights how complex and controversial external military support can be in shifting the balance of power and influencing how a conflict plays out.
there were also whispers, analyses suggesting Russia might have played a double game in 2023, maybe even letting the offensive happen.
Yes, some analysts speculate Russia might have deliberately allowed it, perhaps to weaken Armenia's reliance on Moscow, or to cement Russia's own role as the ultimate power broker.
What's the evidence for that?
The argument often points to Russia's lack of a strong response despite its security commitments to Armenia. But it's really important to stress there's no definitive proof for this theory. Russia officially maintained its peacekeeping role, even though it ultimately failed to prevent the takeover.
So, trying to cut through the noise, what are the key distinctions between common assumptions and the harder realities in Nagorno-Karabakh?
Well, one common misconception is that it's purely about ancient ethnic hatred. While ethnic tensions are undeniably a big factor, the reality is that geopolitics, the strategic importance for energy routes, the maneuvering by Turkey and Russia plays a massive role in driving and sustaining the conflict. It's not just ethnic.
And the idea that Azerbaijan only wanted the territory back.
Again, an oversimplification. Restoring territorial integrity is obviously key for them, but gaining full economic control over those vital energy pipelines running through the region, that's also a major motivator. Those pipelines are critical for Azerbaijan's economy and for energy security elsewhere.
But the sheer scale of the Armenian displacement in 2023? That's an undeniable tragic reality.
Absolutely undeniable. The displacement of roughly 100,000 ethnic Armenians created a huge ongoing humanitarian crisis. People lost homes, livelihoods. They face enormous challenges now in Armenia. It needs urgent, sustained international aid and long-term support.
Looking ahead then, what's the likely future for Nagorno-Karabakh and the wider region? What's the trajectory?
The current trajectory seems to be Azerbaijan consolidating its control over Nagorno-Karabakh. There'll likely be continued focus on sorting out border issues with Armenia.
And Armenia's position.
Armenia faces increased regional isolation. Tensions will likely stay high, especially around things like the proposed Zangezur corridor, that land link connecting mainland Azerbaijan to its Nakhchivan exclave through Armenian territory.
And the risks.
Future risks include more border clashes, always the danger of Turkey or Russia getting more directly involved, which could destabilize the whole South Caucasus, potentially new refugee crises. It's precarious.
Are there any viable strategies, diplomatic efforts trying to forge a more peaceful future?
Well, several approaches could help. Revitalizing peace talks, maybe under the old OSCE Minsk Group framework, to tackle remaining issues like the rights and security of anyone who might return. Sustained humanitarian aid for the displaced is obviously crucial, and maybe exploring regional economic cooperation, joint energy projects, infrastructure things that could create interdependence and incentivize peace long term.
And if these issues aren't addressed properly?
The consequences of just letting it fester are pretty stark. Renewed cycles of violence, more regional instability potentially spilling over, worse humanitarian crises. The need for a sustainable path forward is really urgent.
If you had to pinpoint the most critical step forward for Nagorno-Karabakh, what would it be?
I'd stress the vital importance of fostering direct, meaningful dialogue between the actual local communities on both sides. Supporting safe, dignified resettlement and integration for the refugees is paramount too. And crucially, pushing for transparent, internationally mediated talks that fairly address territorial claims and the rights and security of all populations. That's essential for any lasting stability.
And what do the people directly impacted want? Armenians, Azerbaijanis on the ground.
For the Armenians displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh, it's overwhelmingly about security and the hope, however slim, of a safe return to their homes.
And for Azerbaijanis.
Understandably, the focus is on the full territorial integrity of their nation and sustained economic growth for the whole country, achieving real peace. It's going to require mutual recognition of historical grievances somehow, and creating real economic incentives that favor cooperation over conflict.
Just like Aisha in Kashmir, it's vital we remember the individual stories. We saw the account of Mariam, an Armenian refugee from 2023.
Yes, Mariam's story, reported by France 24, it just powerfully illustrates the human devastation of that 2023 offensive. Losing her home, fleeing with almost nothing. It highlights the deep personal and community trauma displacement causes. Underscores the urgent need for support.
So looking at both these protracted conflicts, Kashmir and Nagorno-Karabakh, what are the big common threads that jump out, and what are the wider implications?
Well, one really striking commonality is that fundamental desire of ordinary people for peace, security, just dignity.
But leaders often prioritize other things.
Exactly. In both regions, leaders often seem focused on nationalistic agendas, power politics, sometimes at the expense of the immediate needs and voices of the locals. We also see the recurring theme of external powers strategically using these conflicts for their own geopolitical advantage, which often just prolongs the suffering.
Disinformation plays a role in both.
A significant and growing role, yes. Sophisticated tools like AI deepfakes manipulating public opinion, inflaming tensions that's happening in both places.
And the potential consequences, if these conflicts just continue unresolved, are truly troubling.
Deeply troubling. Both carry risks of major regional escalation, and with Kashmir, that nuclear shadow is always there. They both fuel ongoing and potential future humanitarian crises. And they can cause wider economic disruption because they're in strategically vital areas.
So how can we, as a global community, as individuals, maybe push back against some misinformation and encourage more constructive approaches?
Well, promoting public education, media literacy that's crucial to fight deliberate disinformation, supporting transparent, impartial investigations when violence occurs, actively amplifying the voices of local peace builders, people working for reconciliation on the ground.
And on a global level.
Supporting neutral, sustained mediation efforts, providing comprehensive humanitarian aid, fostering cross-border economic cooperation where possible. These can all contribute to de-escalation and hopefully, eventually, sustainable solutions.
And it's just so clear that in both Kashmir and Nagorno-Karabakh, the people actually living there often feel trapped between these huge geopolitical forces, just yearning for some agency, some self-determination, a future without constant violence.
That deep yearning for agency, for peace, it's a powerful undercurrent in both conflicts. You see it consistently in the on-the-ground reporting from places like Al Jazeera and France 24.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's really clear these aren't just isolated local disputes, are they? They're deeply tangled up in complex global power dynamics, fueled by conflicting histories, and they carry just a devastating human cost.
Yes, and maybe a key takeaway for you listening is understanding just how much external actors and frankly, the hidden manipulation of information can shape these conflicts, often in ways that aren't immediately obvious.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider. Given this powerful, often unseen influence of outside actors, and the insidious impact of disinformation in places like Kashmir and Nagorno-Karabakh, how can each of us become more discerning consumers of information? How can we be more effective advocates for peaceful resolutions, not just there, but in other global flashpoints? How do we critically analyze the narratives we're fed and actively support those working for a more stable, just world, even when the conflicts seem far away? It's definitely something worth pondering long after this deep dive ends. Thanks for joining us.